Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. In Hanoi, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un didn't take the U.S.'s big deal offer to dismantle all its weapons of mass destruction in exchange for a bright future. But the Trump administration believes it can denuclearize North Korea within President Trump's current term. Today, we'll look at what's next for U.S.-North Korea talks.
That I'll have a team in Pyongyang in the next couple weeks.
I would be very, very disappointed in Chairman Kim, and I don't think I will be, but we'll see what happens. We'll take a look.
In the studio with me today, Mr. Robert Einhorn, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Mr. Einhorn served as a Special Advisor for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control at the State Department. Also joining me today, Mr. Scott Snyder, Director of U.S.-Korea Policy Program at the Council on Foreign Relations. His latest book, South Korea at the Crossroads, charts the evolution of South Korean foreign policy and strategic choices. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, after the Hanoi summit, U.S. officials confirmed that the U.S. Offered a big deal, including all the WMD, biochemical, and ballistic missiles. But then, why wasn't Chairman Kim ready to take this offer?
I think one reason was that the North Korean delegation was expecting a smaller package. I think that had been under discussion. The shutdown of the Yongbyon nuclear complex, or perhaps part of Yongbyon, in exchange for some relatively modest concessions by the United States. The North made a proposal for the United States to lift most consequential sanctions. The U.S. wasn't prepared to do that and counter-proposed that the North eliminate all WMD programs. I don't think the North was expecting that, and in any event, that's not a proposal that they support in any event. So it's not surprising that they couldn't accept it.
Yeah, I agree that if we could look back to the aftermath of the Singapore summit, the comprehensive declaration proposal by the U.S. really was representative of a kind of big deal. And the North Koreans made a counteroffer at the Pyongyang summit in the form of focusing on Yongbyon. And so I think that they had thought that they had beaten back the idea of taking the whole program and settling it in one bite.
So why is only Yongbyon unacceptable to the U.S. side?
I think here what's really important is the evolution of the North Korean program over the course of the past decade. And of course, back in the six-party talks, we focused on Yongbyon. But the North Korean program has diversified. And it is located in many more sites. And so the challenge of getting at a true pathway to denuclearization is much harder, and it extends beyond the scope of just the Yongbyon complex.
If I could just add to that, shutting down Yongbyon would be a significant step. Yongbyon contains the only known nuclear reactor, so therefore the only known source of plutonium. It also has a significant uranium enrichment facility, and probably it's the place where they produce tritium, which is needed for thermonuclear weapons. So shutting that down would be an important step. But we are very sure, the United States, the ROK, are very sure that North Korea has facilities, enrichment-related facilities outside of Yongbyon. And only going after Yongbyon and shutting it down would not halt North Korea's production of bomb-making nuclear material. So I think that's why. First step is a good idea, but we'd have to go significantly beyond that step and soon in order really to halt North Korea's production of nuclear weapons.
You mentioned tritium, and right after the Hanoi summit, in the background briefing, when the reporters asked the senior official whether tritium was part of the Yongbyon deal, the U.S. official didn't really say anything about it. Why do you think he didn't clarify about the tritium part?
Well, you can produce tritium in a number of ways. You could produce it in a nuclear reactor, and if that's the way North Korea produces tritium, then shutting down Yongbyon would deal with that. But you can also produce tritium in other ways, for example, with a linear accelerator. We don't know whether North Korea has such a facility for producing tritium outside of Yongbyon. That's why perhaps the U.S. official wasn't prepared to get into that subject.
And Mr. Einhorn mentioned about the uranium facilities and undeclared facilities, and it seems there are many reports about these undeclared highly enriched uranium facilities in North Korea, and North Korea is not getting in there dealing with that yet. Why is it important to pin down these facilities in the agreement?
Well, again, I think that goes to the issue of intent with regard to denuclearization. And we had a very good idea of what was happening on the plutonium pathway to gaining nuclear capability. But this uranium enrichment facility issue is really challenging because it's so hard to monitor and verify. It really requires cooperation, as far as I understand, with the target state to be able to do the kind of monitoring that would be necessary in order to be assured that fissile material production was not going on.
This week, senior official in a background briefing said that the goal is still final and fully verified denuclearization of North Korea within President Trump's first term in office, which is January 2021. Dr. Siegfried Hecker says it's going to take 15 years to denuclearize North Korea. So in a technical sense, what is your take regarding the Trump administration's goal?
Well, I think when the Trump administration talks about 1 year from the time of reaching agreement, what they have in mind is North Korea physically turning over their nuclear weapons, turning over the fissile material that exists outside of nuclear weapons, turning over long-range missiles, maybe ICBMs, dealing with the chemical biological weapons threat, shutting down work at production facilities for nuclear and missile. This can be done within 1 year. But what do you have once, at that point? You don't have a verified denuclearization. You simply have North Korea's unilateral assertions of what their program was. You'd have to follow that up with many years, actually, of verification, if you want to make it irreversible, you have to deal with the facilities. Within 1 year, you can't dismantle all of those facilities. So when they're talking about 1 year, they're talking about just this initial phase of turning a lot of stuff over. But it would take, as Sig Hecker has pointed out, a decade or so to have a fully verified and final denuclearization.
So it would be important to get a declaration list before moving out and dismantling stuff.
Well, the declaration list, I think, is exactly what the U.S. Would like to have in order to be able to move along that path to fully achieve the goal. The challenge, of course, is that we know that the North Koreans were not there yet. And so how do you go about addressing this in a different way? It's complicated. The small deal gives you a start, it gives you a foothold. It doesn't provide you the upfront assurance that you're going to achieve the objective. But at the same time, identifying the details, the scope of a small deal, to ensure that you are not diverted from the desired pathway of full denuclearization is very important. And so I think that there's complexity here, and actually that's the reason why working level talks are so critical, and we simply didn't have time to have the kinds of talks necessary to achieve that objective in advance of Hanoi.
If I could add to that, Enjung, I think the administration made a big mistake in opening the negotiations by requesting a comprehensive declaration. All the nuclear weapons, where they're located, how many missiles, where they were produced, all of these things. They should have known that the North Koreans were not going to, at this stage of the game, provide such a declaration. The North Koreans said, we're not going to give you a targeting list. So I think that was a mistake. I think they've become more realistic. I think the scope of any declaration should be tied to the limitation you've agreed upon. So, for example, for the small deal, for Yangbyan, there doesn't have to be much of a declaration because we know these are known facilities. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has been there before, so there's not much needed. A broader measure, such as shutting down all production of fissile material anywhere in the country, you'd need a broader declaration. Not as broad as the initial U.S. proposal, but at least you'd need to know all production facilities in North Korea. So the declaration really needs to be tied to what is being agreed.
So North Korea's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho says that North Korea's proposal will never change. What do you think will be North Korea's next move?
Well, I hope that North Korea will decide to come back to talks so that we can have working level talks and try to figure out how to move forward. But I also worry that the North Koreans may misread the United States at this point because of the subsequent developments that have occurred. And they might start to back off from the possibility of talks. It's possible that we're moving toward a kind of renewed desire to send threatening signals as a way of trying to recover leverage that the North Koreans feel they may have lost in recent months. The testing regime is there, but the sanctions are still there. And I think the North Koreans may feel like time is not on their side and they need to restore the ability to engage with the U.S. from a position of greater strength.
So regarding the threatening signal that Mr. Snyder just mentioned, the latest activity at the Dongchangri launch site, is that a signal to the United States that North Korea is unhappy?
It may be. I think President Trump and Steve Biegun have taken the view that we really don't know what signal they may be sending. Now, there's no indication yet that they're planning to launch a space launch vehicle. But the administration has put out the word in a background briefing yesterday that if they did this, if they launched a space launch vehicle, the United States would consider this inconsistent with the promises made by Kim Jong-un to have a moratorium on all missile flight tests. So this is a problem. I mean, hopefully the North will be wise enough not to go ahead and launch a space launch vehicle, because I think this would be the end of the current phase of U.S. DPRK negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Einhorn, you were directly involved in talks with North Korea before, and looking at the current diplomacy, do you think North Korea is playing the same old playbook, and has the U.S. changed a little bit? What's your take?
Well, the North Korean playbook is pretty consistent. Let's go step by step, and at each step of the way, the North Koreans ask the maximum of the United States and offer the minimum. I think it's the United States that has changed its playbook. It's been an erratic approach. We went for the big deal, then it looked like in advance of Hanoi, we were going to go for a small deal. Then when that didn't work out, we went back to the big deal. President Trump had talked about, 1 year. We should achieve this job in 1 year. The administration said that. Then he became more relaxed. We're not in a rush. This could take many months, even several years. And now, again, the administration is emphasizing we need to do this in President Trump's first term of office, even within a year. So it's the U.S. that's been kind of unpredictable. And I think this has confused the North Koreans.
I think that's right. And I think that it was just so interesting that Vice Minister Choi Sun-hee came out and said that the U.S. was unpredictable. And so on the one hand, I think that it's important for the North Koreans to recognize that we may not follow the same playbook that we've used in the past. But at the same time, it's very clear that the North Koreans may be perplexed by the scope of uncertainty that negotiating with the Trump administration and with Donald Trump has introduced into this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see how things go from here, and we'll leave our conversation here and move on to our next topic.
It's clear that the North Korean regime was ill-prepared for denuclearization, a promise that Kim Jong-un made in Singapore.
제재의 틀 내에서 남북관계의 발전을 통해 북미 대화에 도움을 줄 수 있는 방안들을 최대한 찾아주기 바랍니다.
After the breakdown of the Hanoi summit, President Moon called for speedy preparations to start inter-Korean cooperation projects. This despite no progress in denuclearization. Now, Mr. Snyder, South Korean President Moon is adopting North Korea's talking points that offering Yongbyon is a irreversible denuclearization, and that the two sides discussed partial lifting of the sanctions, which the U.S. side says amounts to the complete sanctions relief. So is South Korea currently, if it's in a mediating role, shouldn't it at least take a neutral position?
Okay, well, this is a very complicated issue because, first of all, I don't think that a mediator necessarily has to be neutral. But the core issue here is that the United States sees South Korea as an ally, and the North Koreans are on the other side. And when President Moon veers in the direction of sounding like he's closer to a North Korean position than the U.S. position, people in Washington take notice. But I think the critical issue here that is a little bit off is that Yongbyon dismantlement has proven in the past not to be irreversible. And we are arguing that sanctions lifting cannot be partial. So in that sense, I think that President Moon has it exactly the opposite of the way that we are seeing it in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Einhorn, the diplomacy between the United States and North Korea started after South Korean president and South Korean government came to the United States and delivered North Korean intentions to denuclearize. But then the Hanoi summit broke down and there was no progress in denuclearization. So should we question, did South Korea play a good broker?
So far, the United States and the ROK have been pretty good, have cooperated pretty well. The President Moon and his administration have recognized that inter-Korean relations depend on steps toward denuclearization. It has recognized that it would not be wise to get out in front on inter-Korean relations when denuclearization is stalled. And I think the Trump administration has appreciated that. But it's clear that President Moon and his administration have been chafing at the idea of inter-Korean relations being stalled because the United States is not prepared to make certain exceptions to the sanctions regime for inter-Korean projects like the Kaesong Industrial Complex, like the Kumgang Mountain Tourist Project. And I think with the breakdown of the process in Hanoi, I think there will be a temptation for President Moon to try to move out on inter-Korean relations, even as denuclearization is stalled. I think that would be a big mistake. I think it's very important, as difficult as it is for the South Korean government, to try to work with the United States and to continue to link inter-Korean progress to steps toward denuclearization.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually at the one-year anniversary of the moment when National Security Advisor Chung Woo-young announced that President Trump had received an invitation from Kim Jong-un on the front of the White House. And at that time, basically, I think South Korea was playing a messenger role and a kind of facilitating role. But really, a mediating role is a very dangerous potential role for South Korea to play. And also, it's an unnecessary role in the sense that the U.S. and North Korea do now have communications channels by which we can negotiate. So I think it's great for South Korea to talk to the North Koreans and figure out what they need, talk to the U.S. and figure out what we're looking for, and try to make some suggestions about closing the gap. But the idea of playing a mediating role, I think, is really a little bit more than one would want to bite off.
And Mr. Snyder, President Moon just named the new unification minister as a scholar who's a pro-North Korea engagement person. Time like this, naming pro-engagement scholar as a unification minister, is there a message or is there a show of intention from the President Moon's side?
Well, the South Korean president can pick the people that he wants in order to try to achieve the objectives. I do believe that the former Minister of Unification, Cho, was an experienced bureaucrat. He knew the sanctions regime backwards and forwards and knew what could and could not be done with North Korea. And this individual, Kim Yong-chol, he's a scholar. He doesn't have that bureaucratic experience. He may find that he is frustrated coming into this kind of bureaucratic role. And it's going to be a bit of a challenge, and actually it does send a bit of an odd signal right at this moment for the unification minister to be replaced at all.
So last question. So Mr. Einhorn, going forward, what would be the best way for the U.S. and South Korea to deal with this issue, the inter-Korean economic projects?
I think they need to consult very, very closely on this and make sure they don't get out of step with each other. I think the ROK needs to understand that it must continue to link progress on North-South relations with denuclearization, but the United States must appreciate the strong views of its ally and must be a bit more flexible in terms of making exceptions to the sanctions regime in order for certain important inter-Korean projects to go forward.
I agree that basically the U.S.-South Korea relationship is the axle between the wheels of the U.S.-North Korea relationship and the inter-Korean relationship. And actually the Moon administration recognized this from the beginning of the process, to its credit. And so I believe that as long as that connection is honored and remains in place, we'll have success because we'll be doing it together.
Well, we'll end our conversation here and move on to our next segment. Now, time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today, we have a picture of Chairman Kim arriving at Pyongyang Station at 3 a.m. in the morning. Senior officials and Pyongyang citizens of all ages greeted him with cheers and flowers. North Korean media reported Kim's trip to Vietnam produced results. Mr. Snyder?
Well, it's a big advantage to be in a closed information environment because it means that whatever you do is going to be regarded and treated as a success. And so from that perspective, I think that this is exactly the kind of welcome home back to Pyongyang that I would expect that Kim Jong-un would receive.
Mr. Einhorn?
It's a little ambiguous, the expression on Chairman Kim's face. 3 a.m., maybe he's just tired, but maybe he's a bit frustrated as well. So we really can't tell.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Einhorn and Mr. Snyder, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eunjung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.